sorry for the delay. Okay. We're sorry for the delay and the confusion. It's probably gotten more of you here than might have been either the originally scheduled 8:30 ones, if any of you are as exhausted as the rest of us. I'm Janet Gallagher from the New York City Women's Union. The panel this morning is the Lesbian panel. We've invited sisters from 4 different cities, several different organizations, to address the group as a whole, to share perspectives, critiques, problems, good points about the sometimes choppy relationships between the lesbian community and the socialist feminist movement, such as it is at this point in history. The sisters are from Chicago, Atlanta, New York City, Washington, D.C. And we'd like to begin, I think, Charlotte, are you going to begin? The sister from Chicago, Chris is going to start. They will introduce themselves.
My name is Chris Ridion. I'm from the Chicago Women's Liberation Union, and I work with the lesbian work group of the Women's Union there. We'd like to address 2 primary questions in this discussion. What is our understanding of lesbian oppression, and what is our practice around it? Of course, these 2 questions are not really separable. Our analysis will guide the work we do, and as we work, we will grow in our understanding of lesbian oppression. To develop our understanding, we need to first of all look at who lesbians are in terms of race, class, marital status, and so on. This is difficult to address since no one has yet done a satisfactory class analysis of the United States, and furthermore, very little is known about lesbian class positions. What information we have comes from the work that has been done with lesbians. It suggests that lesbians come from all classes and races. Like most people, most lesbians are working class. For many women, class is determined by their husbands or fathers. Since lesbians have more identification with the workplace, their class and class consciousness is more determined by their own position. This suggests the possibility of developing strong working class consciousness and activity among lesbians. Since lesbians suffer from a common oppression, it is possible to build solidarity in struggles against racism and class structure. We may note the recent case of Sergeant Matlovich, an Air Force sergeant who is fighting anti-gay military regulations, and who, having come to grips with his gayness, was better able to understand racist discrimination. All of this is couched in terms of possibilities. That's pretty much as far as we can go at this time. The definites are few. Lesbians are from all classes and races. Some are married, some are not. Some are raising children. We range in age from teenager to old woman. Given this, what can we say about lesbian oppression? How does it relate to capitalism and sexism? Once again, we're only at a beginning point. There is no unified theory of socialist feminism, although we're moving in that direction. Many authors agree on some points. Both biology and the organization of production shape women's situation. Neither of these is unchangeable. They interact to give a specific form of sex and class oppression. With the rise of industrial capitalism, productive functions were removed from the home, creating a split between public life, production, and private life, the family. Class consciousness is decreased because of the recentering of working class life in the private sphere. Women are the caretakers of private life. We have roles in reproduction, sexuality, and the socialization of children. Women's and gay liberation are both born out of an understanding of oppression due to strict sex role expectations. The split between private and public life has led to defined roles for men and women. Gay people don't fit into these roles. Because the roles are different for men and women, male homosexuals and lesbians are affected in different ways. Lesbians and male homosexuals on the job are oppressed, but not exploited. As women, lesbians are exploited. Lesbians reveal the separation between sexuality and reproduction in a way, male homosexuals do not. Lesbians raise children outside the nuclear family. These kind of things mean that lesbians pose a threat to the sexual stereotypes of women and to the roles of women as family caretakers. Gays don't fit into sex roles, and we challenge sexuality rules. This is the basis of our oppression. What forms does that oppression take? Gay people have a name for gay oppression, although many gays might not think in terms of oppression. We call it the closet. The closet represents perhaps the most extreme form of separation of public and private life. Being in the closet, which most of us are, the Chicago Women's Liberation Union political principles read, in part, women's liberation is essential to the liberation of all oppressed people. Women's liberation will not be achieved until all people are free. Much the same can be said of gay and in particular lesbian liberation. Lesbian liberation implies the breakdown of sex role stereotypes, which is crucial to women's liberation. It means the end of divisions between public and private life, and an expansion of what our ideas are about the family. In order to achieve our liberation, we must put our analysis into practice. Our understanding implies a strong basis for organizing and building class consciousness among lesbians. We must understand that the liberation of lesbians rests not only on ending gay oppression, but also on ending sex, class, and race oppression. Otherwise, most lesbians will still be under the yoke of these systems of oppression. So there is a basis for organizing in the lesbian community, but the invisibility and isolation leads to fears and risks for lesbians. To do good organizing split, which no one here wants to mention directly, and I'm bringing it up not because I want to relive it. Anybody who went through that does not want to relive it, but because it is a very important part of our political history. And there are political reasons for that split and political basis for that split that I think still are with us. Reasons which we have to struggle with, and I think to ignore them or to sort of pretend that we didn't have that problem or that we didn't go through that nasty affair does not help us get beyond it. The dykes always talk too loud. Okay, thank you, I'm just teasing. Have to have a little humor in life. I think that it's important to know why we were separatists. I and the women in the Furies left the women's movement at that time because we felt there was no space there for us to develop a lesbian feminist politics and lifestyle. And there are many other women, many other lesbians who believe in socialism who still feel that there's no space in the socialist feminist or the women's movement in general for them to develop that politics and to live that life. I don't want to be a separatist. I don't think anyone who has experienced the isolation of that knows or believes that that is the ultimate end product for women, for our own liberation. But the question for me is what unity? Unity on what terms and around what politics? To unify the lesbian feminist politics that has developed in the past 4 years with socialist feminism, I think requires all of us to develop what I call a principled political recognition of what that politics is and how it has to be incorporated in an overall analysis of women's oppression. Now, Chris has touched on a lot of those points, and I just want to, for me this is a 3-hour speech, and I'm trying to do it in 10 minutes. But each of us is adding to those points. What is that politics? I think the heart of lesbian feminist theory and politics is the recognition that heterosexuality as an institution and an ideology is crucial, is a cornerstone to male supremacy. Therefore, any woman interested in fighting male supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, has got also to fight heterosexual domination, or we will never end female oppression. This is what I refer to as the heterosexual question, not the lesbian question. It is not primarily a problem of lesbians. It is primarily a problem not of the personal issue of sexual preference, but of a political and institutional basis of all women's oppression that has got to be ended. That institution, and people have given different parts of this analysis, so I'm not going to run through it in detail, but that institution upholds all of those things which we have been talking about yesterday and today that oppress women. The institution of heterosexuality is basic to our oppression in the workplace. If you look at how we are defined in the workplace as secondary and marginal workers, that definition could not exist if you did not assume that we were attached to men. Women's oppression is tied, obviously, I mentioned the workplace because I was upset yesterday afternoon in the economics panel that that connection was not made. I'm not saying that all women will become lesbians, but there is a very high percentage of women workers who provide a very, very important base for political opposition to capitalism. It's more obvious to everybody how heterosexuality upholds the home, housework, the family as both a personal and economic unit. And finally, I think that the assumption of heterosexuality, and again I'm talking about not just who somebody sleeps with, but a whole institutional and ideological framework of how we are defined and what our lives are supposed to be, is I think very basic to the negative self-image and self-hatred that women have in this society. And therefore it is also a question of our development of a positive woman-identified identity, which is based on a rejection of that definition of ourselves. Again, no matter what your particular sexual preference is, a rejection of that definition of your life. What is that definition? Basically, heterosexuality means men first. That's what it means. It defines and assumes that every woman is defined by and the property of a man. Her body, her services, her children belong to a man. If she doesn't accept that definition, she's queer. She's a dyke. No matter who you sleep with, if you do not accept that definition, in this society you are a queer. And therefore, I think that assumption, beginning with that imperialist assumption of the right of one man to the body and services of another woman, translates, upholds a whole variety of forms of domination throughout this society. That as long as people accept that initial assumption, it is very difficult to challenge all the other forms of domination that we also see prevalent today. More importantly, in some ways, I think, is the question of privilege and heterosexual privilege. Now, many people ask me, what is heterosexual privilege? If you don't already have a sense of what it is, I suggest that you go home and you announce to everybody that you know, if you're in school, a roommate, your family, on the job, everywhere you go, you say you're a queer for a week. Do not walk out on the street with men. Walk only with women at night. For a whole week, experience life as if you were a lesbian, and I think you will know what heterosexual privilege is very quickly. But I'm not just interested in lesbian oppression. I'm interested in the question of privilege. We all know, we've all learned about white race privilege. We know what that does to keep us in place. What I'm interested in is understanding that heterosexual privilege is the method by which women are given a stake in male supremacy. It is the method by which we are given a stake in our own oppression. It is the method of receiving the benefits of male privilege indirectly and diluted, and therefore not really in our benefit, but in fact of passing on to us male privilege, which makes us have a stake in continuing male supremacy. I want to point out that that's diluted because I think no matter what your connection to men personally, that is not in your self-interest. That receiving that heterosexual privilege is ultimately your own destruction. Because it means that women are tied individually to their own survival is tied individually to men, and it separates us constantly. The question arises not because I want to ask whether some particular woman is personally loyal to women or not, but what stake do you have in the system of male supremacy? And if you are receiving its benefits through a man, are you clear about rejecting those benefits? Are you clear about what those benefits do to you institutionally? For example, I have known women who are whose husband's job starts to be threatened by a question of minority and feminist demands for jobs, who desert that position because of their stake in keeping their own privilege in relation to that job. I'm not saying that has to happen, but I think that we have to recognize how heterosexual privilege functions to tie us to male supremacy. This analysis that I'm giving as a function of heterosexuality and women's oppression can be, and I think in some cases has been made by any woman. I repeat, any woman, straight or gay, can understand that analysis. Lesbian feminism is not a politics for lesbians only. It is a political perspective and a political fight against one, only one, and I'm not mentioning all the others because I think they've been mentioned sufficiently here, but one of the major institutions that upholds all women's oppression. Lesbian feminism represents the politics and the fight against that institution as it oppresses all of us. It's not surprising that it's mostly lesbians who have seen this issue first because it is materially oppressing us daily. That's not because we have any, quote, superior consciousness or more moral or any of that crap. It's simply because it is our reality and we're trying to convey that reality to you because it also oppresses you. And because if we are going to change and survive, all of us have got to attack that. There's one other important, I know I don't have too much more time, but there's one other important aspect of lesbian feminism that I think is crucial to a socialist feminist conference, and that's the connection between lesbianism and class. One of the ways that lesbianism has affected the movement is in changing women's individual lives. We have got to, particularly those of us who are out in all ways, have to create our own world. We don't have any choice. There is no institution in this society that is created for us. There is no place in which we belong, particularly once you are out, and I think that's one of the importances of people coming out. And it's very crucial for people to come out because you are in a new reality in terms of what you have to do. Again, necessity is what moves people. I don't believe that idealism is the primary force that moves people. It's necessity. And lesbians who are out have got to create our own world. And frequently that has been characterized as cultural. Its primary impact is not cultural. Its primary impact is economic. It is also cultural. The culture gives us a strength, but its primary impact, particularly for middle-class women, is economic. Is discovering that you have to support yourself for the rest of your life and beginning to understand what lower and working class women have always known. Beginning to understand what lower and working class women are trying to tell us when we give a lot of rhetoric about class, but what they're really trying to tell us is, what do you know about survival? That is, and I had a lot of class background in the left, and I don't repudiate that. That was very helpful. But it was really when I came out and had to face my own survival on that basis as a woman alone that I learned about class in my own life, that I learned about my own middle-class assumptions and the way in which my own middle-class background crippled me as a woman, the way in which our middle-class background hold us back in the movement all the time, and the way in which middle-class assumptions have held back our movement. And they've held back our movement not just in some theoretical way, but in the way that we operate. And we could go on and analyze that here today, because I've seen a lot of that yesterday, which I'd really like to talk about. Because as far as I'm concerned, you don't understand class until you understand how it functions right here, on the spot, day to day, in our lives. And then maybe we'll understand it in society. I feel like I should quit now. A little flustered. I did not expect it. I expected more hostility. There's another way in which I think that class recognition has occurred, and I want to acknowledge because it's one of those questions that's kept in the closet or the bedroom. And that is the intimate contact that occurs across class lines in the lesbian community. I think that we cannot underestimate the impact of that. And I'm not saying that therefore every middle-class woman should go out and get a lower-class lesbian to teach you about class. However, if you do, as I have, there is no faster way to learn about class oppression than to be hit over the head with it daily, in a daily way. And I think that I'm saying that not because I want to see us go out and exploit lower and working class women that way, but because that is something that occurs all the time in the lesbian community. Frequently without any politics, defined as such, as you were saying about the bar, frequently without any political overtones, but a very political process is going on in that bar. And it is not, in fact, too difficult to talk about politics there if you recognize what is politically going on in women's lives when they're there on that place and in that place. And not just relate to it as a rhetorical political question, but see that there is enormous class conflict, there's racial conflict, there are issues that are very basic to women's survival that are it's sort of like a crystallization because there are no men in that environment. All those issues become crystal clear if you understand it, not in rhetorical terms, but as women's lives are interacting with each other. And I think that that's one reason why a lot of class analysis, particularly the practical analysis of class, has come out of the lesbian feminist movement. Again, it's not because there is some more, moral or more superior notion of class, but because of that experience of our own reality and that experience of that kind of class conflict and recognition of it. I want to say again, I think that that is the kind of material basis that produces real commitment to struggle to the class question and ultimately to socialism. That is the kind of basis of experience that makes people's commitment to socialist principles not out of idealism, which I do not trust, because idealism can be deserted at any time, but out of survival. I want to say a couple of things quickly that I'm not saying, because I think they have been a part of the mistaken discussion that has gone on about lesbian feminist politics and the gay-straight split. I'm not saying that all lesbians are feminists or politically conscious. I am saying that there is a particular material reality of the lesbian life which makes that political consciousness possible, and I think that makes it not in any of our interests to defend and maintain the system as it is, that can be built upon. Not that all lesbians have that politics, not that there isn't class operative within the lesbian community, of course there is, but that there is a certain reality we can build on. The other thing is that I want to be clear I'm not saying the only way to have that analysis is to be a lesbian. I am saying that most of the people who have it and have challenged heterosexuality are lesbians, but that is not the only way to do it. And not only is it not the only way, we've got to make it not the only way. Because we as lesbians are a minority, and we know it, and we cannot survive alone. We will not survive alone, and if we do not survive, the whole women's movement will be drastically affected, and as far as I'm concerned, female oppression will be reenacted in another form. Our survival is intimately linked to the survival of heterosexual women. Whether we like that or not like it is irrelevant. That is a part of the survival question. The important thing I'm trying to say is the politics of what we understand from our life experience has got to be integrated into the politics of the socialist feminists, the women's movement, as we understand all of women's oppression. Final thing I want to just say is it's not okay to be queer in patriarchy. It is not okay to be queer in patriarchy, and the last thing in the world we should be aiming to do is to make it okay. Because there is nothing in capitalist patriarchal America that works to our benefit, and I do not want to see us working in ways, I'm not saying we don't work on reform issues, of course we do, it's very important to be able to keep your job, but in doing that, we have to be very clear that our ultimate goal is not to be integrated into patriarchy, that our very strength as lesbians lies in the fact that we are outside of that system, that our existence challenges it, and to work for acceptance into that system instead of total change of it is, from a lesbian feminist point of view, to work for our own disintegration and to work for an end to the very strength that we bring to the women's movement, and an end, obviously, to it's a giving up on the rest of the aspects of what oppress us as women. So that I do not think it is okay, and I do not want it ever to be okay to be queer in patriarchy. I want to see that whole system, patriarchy, capitalism, changed, and integral to that is the question of our oppression as lesbians. We cannot work in movements that do not end that oppression and recognize that oppression is crucial to all women's oppression, because that is to work against our own survival, and that is our own destruction as well. But we can and must coalesce with groups that share that analysis and are committed to that change, and that's what I'd like to see come out of here. Thank you.
that we are going to have a lesbian feminist theory and strategy workshop from 4 to 6 for people who want to talk more about some of the things Chris said and I said about where to go with this analysis. I don't know the place, it will be announced later.
That's a hard act to follow. My name is Vicki Gabriner. I come from Atlanta, obviously not a native. I'm a member of the Atlanta Lesbian Feminist Alliance and Georgians for the Equal Rights Amendment. And I'd like to offer you the possibility of working on the Equal Rights Amendment or other issues which are usually dismissed very quickly as reform issues, that word that seems to strike fear into the hearts of all socialist feminists. But I'd like to share it with you as one possible mode of action. And I'd like to share with you a unique situation in Atlanta where out front lesbians and socialists were open participants in the Equal Rights Amendment struggle, helped to build a mass-based movement for the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, and created a space for lesbians in Atlanta which really did not exist before. I think that part of our experience as lesbians, part of our oppression as lesbians, is that very often we do not deal out front on issues as lesbians, which is a necessary step in establishing ourselves as a political force.
In the socialist theory, to work in coalition with other socialist organizations or the left organizations, other organizations of all sorts. So we started out as a discussion group just talking about things, and we developed into sort of a separate entity from out of itself. And as I said, we've written a position paper, and we're trying to work with these other groups.